Hi, everyone. Well, thank you for joining us today. I'm here to present some of the findings that we have been seeing during our review of the TCFD reporting trends among the FTSE 100 on the research that we conducted earlier this year. Just a little bit of a background. We started tracking the TCFD reporting actually 3 years ago, originally as part of our annual analysis of the FTSE 100 annual reports. Last year, however, under the Horizon Series banner, we published our very first TCFD-specific research report. Now, we think that the consideration around climate issues are becoming ever more important in this current pandemic for all economies to build back better. Around the world, we see governments, like Canada and Denmark are examples, putting requirements around sustainable, resilient recovery before extending government support scheme for businesses. So these areas are definitely of concern, and it's really something that corporates need to take into account in their recovery strategy. In the UK, all listed companies and large asset owners are expected to disclose in line with the TCFD recommendations by 2022. And moving forward, it is likely that TCFD reporting will become compulsory, as Wanchen mentioned earlier. So it is already part of the UK green finance strategy that the government disclosed last year. Our second TCFD research report is being published soon. And so the following is a preview of some of the findings that we see. This slide here that Joanne has shown it's a summary really of all the metrics that we have been tracking. We track metrics related to all 11 of the TCFD recommendations, as well as some additional metrics around the uptake of climate issues in the leadership statements of the annual report. As you can see, the summary, if you see, you can, the numbers are quite small, but the if you see the yellow dots being, the previous years where we reviewed the 2018 annual reports, and the blue ones are the most latest numbers based on review of the 2019 annual reports. We see that across the board there is an improvement, a positive movement, and some is more than others in the individual metrics, but the movement is a positive one from one year to another. Now, our upcoming report is titled Accelerated Action for Climate Resilience, because while we see a significant increase in the companies referencing the TCFD, we think that there are still gaps between company commitments and meaningful disclosures that will need to be addressed in an accelerated manner, I think. Joanne, if you can move to the next slide, please. So heading on to some of the insights that we see around leadership, we see that more companies this year are discussing climate change issues in the chair and CEO statements. This is a big jump. We see that now little under half of the FTSE 100 describe leadership approach around climate issues, and this is from only 16% in 2018. And also encouragingly, the next set of numbers illustrates the move to a majority of the FTSE 100 referencing TCFD from a majority that didn't. So last year, this number was 39%. And this year, we have the majority referencing TCFD, 67%. However, when we dig a little bit deeper, despite the increased reference, we find still very few companies meeting all 11 disclosure recommendations. That number still stays stubbornly at around 3% from last year. Next slide, please, Joan. Moving on to areas of risk and opportunities, we find that our analysis shows a noticeable shift in discussion around risk and opportunities of climate change this year, with almost half of the companies discussing climate-related risks in their principal risk section, compared to only 32 last year. And again, and we dig a little deeper to see how that translates to implementation in business strategies, we find that only 7% describe the resilience of their strategy against at least one climate scenario, including a 2 degrees or lower scenario. So there are still challenges in embedding into business strategies from risk. Next slide, please. Looking at governance, there has been some clear progression on board oversight of climate issues, with 48% of the FTSE 100s evidencing this, up from only 26% last year. However, when we look closer, the discussion seems to be mainly focused on who takes responsibility at board and management levels, with little information on how the board has oversight, really. We are seeing only 38% disclose both board and management's role in managing those climate-related risks. In addition, we are also seeing companies forming steering committees, and these committees are, of course, in charge of the climate-related issues, and they report to different factions. I guess there's some report to audit, some report to sustainability, some report directly to board. So we feel that ownership in this topic is a little bit fragmented, and it's a development that is interesting to keep our eyes on, I think, in the future, to see where eventually that will land. And Joanne, coming to our last couple of findings. One more area where we see areas for improvement is that we see not all companies that discuss climate-related risk under their principal risks also discuss the opportunities, and vice versa. And this is despite the TCFD explicitly asking companies to discuss both the risks and opportunities. Our findings show only 29% report on both as per the TCFD recommendation. So there's still gaps there and opportunities to improve. And finally, we are seeing that companies are taking a variety of approaches and terms when setting emission goals. But overall, we see a trend in the growing number of companies that sets ambitious targets to reduce emissions. Almost half of the FTSE, 46% now, are setting net zero or science-based targets today, up from just a quarter last year. This is encouraging, and it is in line with the UK government's target of bringing all greenhouse gas emissions to net zero by 2050. And that concludes my preview and summarizes the overall findings. And I will now hand over the mic, I think, to Wanchern.
Thanks, Erica, and thanks, Joanne. Before I go on to some of the questions that I think some of you participants may have in your mind, maybe I can do a pre-panel panel. I'm being a little bit cheeky here by invoking Joanne and Erica. You know, there's lots of frameworks. I can see it's a bit alphabet soup. TCFD, GRS, SBs, IR. I get confused. And if you look at the survey results, it seems like we are stuck, our companies are stuck at the technical level in terms of compliance, in terms of disclosure, and somehow they're not thinking strategic enough in terms of the business case. At least in Singapore, Malaysia, the leadership is not taking on the role that they should in driving strategy using sustainability or climate change or GRIs and all these standards. So we seem to be stuck at the bottom there. So maybe Joanne and Erica, maybe you can shed some light on this for the participants. How do we get out of this funk? Get out from the lower depths of sustainability and get it up to be more strategic. Over to you both, ladies.
Maybe I'll start first. I suppose you would need to have a concerted effort both from the bottom up and the top down. I think the working level, those who are involved in strategy and sustainability, I think there needs to be conscious effort to get in touch with each other, link up and work in an integrated fashion. So push the agenda towards the leadership. And from the top, we can also have champions at the leadership level to push the sustainability agenda forward. So when you have both the top down and the bottom up approach, I think we can push the sustainability agenda forward very, very quickly.
Thanks, Joanne. And Erica, from your point of view in the UK, are we still stuck at the bottom, or you see we slowly precipitating upwards in terms of more strategic thinking?
No, I think I see that there's, as our research shown, there's definitely more uptake and ownership from the leadership level now, even though it has been over the years more of a upward traveling movement. Sorry, movement from the bottom up, but now that I guess there's also increasing pressure from the top. I think at some point the convergence point is that everyone will head towards the same direction. So I don't really have anything new to say because everything Joanne said is I think I agree with. We always believe that leadership sets the tone from the top, and so it's very important for leadership to own the issue, and that's why one of the things we like about TCFD is that it brings the issue of climate to the board level, and that helps with the integration of strategy within the business. And to be honest, again, the framework can be applied to any other sustainability issue really, and that's hopefully what we see moving forward.
Thanks. You know what really drives me nuts, Joanne and Erica, is a lot of companies, they talk about GRI, they talk about TCFDs, they talk about SASBs and IR, SDGs, and all these acronyms. Somehow, when you get to the top, the board and senior management will roll their eyes and say, "Get it done," but they don't, just get it done. And at the working level, they get frustrated because it doesn't permeate through the strategy. So how do you stop that conversation, or just talking about a GRI, and tick the box, and then they seem that by ticking the box, they're complete in terms of their sustainability framework, but they don't talk about sustainability strategy. So how do you take the conversation one step further beyond the framework? I know, Joanne, you talk about the bottoms up, but how do you educate the top down? Do we train board directors on GRI? Or do we train the working level on strategy, and somehow we are able to meet in the middle? Profound question.
I suppose it has to be both. And like as Erica said as well, I mean, a lot of it is driven from the tone at the top, right? So I think at some point as well, there has to be education for the board on these sort of issues. Not to say that they are not aware of it, but they probably do not know what to do next. So in terms of director training and all that, I think there needs to be some effort on that aspect as well. And I suppose that the CEO as well needs to play a part in championing or integrating and considering sustainability issues at the strategic level. So yeah, I think pretty much that's it.
Okay, thanks, Joanne. Erica, any thoughts before we go to the real panel?
Yeah, I think it's really the key is to get the board to understand that it doesn't make sense eventually to have, at the end of the day, to have two separate strategies, a business strategy and sustainability strategy, because there should really only be one strategy that is sustainable. And in a lot of sense, everything is converging now to make everyone realize that all of these topics that traditionally were considered sustainability or CSR topics are actually very relevant to investors. So investors are asking these questions as well, and that's why we are now pivoting sort of from sustainability to ESG, right? When we're looking about talking about some of these topics. So I think it's hopefully becoming easier to for I don't know what you call it, the working levels to communicate this upward to say that, look, this is a business issue. Uh, this is not just a nice tease anymore. It's actually a business issue. Investors are asking about it, and it's something that needs to be considered in a strategy level. Yeah.
Thanks, Erica, and I'm glad that you have good segue into the questions that I think participants would have on this slide here. Thanks, Joanne and Erica, for leading this in. So the challenge for participants and companies out there is really some of these questions. Finding out what do investors really want, how do we compare to peers, we're under internal pressure to perform because all the boxes have been ticked, but yet we've been pressed to do more, and sustainability seems to be the answer to some of these challenges. And things like getting data, we want to score better, but we don't have the resources to gather the data. So here we have sort of compiled some of these challenging questions that companies face throughout our work, and these are some of the responses that Black Sun has helped companies on, and some of the collaterals that you can develop yourself or with Black Sun with regards to how do you respond to some of these challenges. And if I can go to the next slide, Joanne, additional questions on what questions you may have with regards to sustainability. It's integral of what we do, but we don't know how to communicate, and that's been the question that you've been bringing up, Joanne, again and again. How do you integrate that thinking? How do you bring the top to the bottom and the bottom to the top? And somehow they meet somewhere in the middle in terms of the strategy and the thinking behind the framework. And these are some of our responses and collateral. So with that, so thank you, Joanne and Erica, for helping us to set the scene on sustainability framework, some of the research results, the most specific ones on TCFD, where it's generally heading towards. So there still seems to be some hope for us in terms of the future with regards to sustainability reporting. We see some trends and improvements in the UK. In Singapore and Malaysia, there's still room for improvement. And with that, let's bring on the panel. Joanne, you can bring on the panel discussion. So we got a couple of heavy hitters, Lin Sim, Special Advisor to Singapore Exchange, and the Global Vice Chair on TCFD, Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosure. For those who haven't found out by now, TCFD is a long phrase, but being shortened is easy to pronounce. TCFD. Lin Sim is an old friend, fellow board director, and she's going to be in a panel together with Sally. Sally Pilot, you can bring up the next slide, Joanne, is our head of Chief Insight Officer and Engagement Director at Black Sun. Years of experience in corporate reporting, sits on the board of the Investor Relations Association in the UK, very experienced. And so I guess by now you've noticed that I've got 4 ladies, 2 on the panel and 2 speakers. So I'm treading on dangerous ground here. But with that, let me bring on both Lin Sim and Sally. And Joanne and Erica, please stay on and chime in as when you needed to, when you need to. So these are the 5 questions I'm going to pose to Lin Sim and Sally. We start with the purpose of TCFD. So why in the world did we start TCFD, and is it going to change the world? I'm sure Sally and Lin Sim have some insights on that. What are the benefits of companies who adopt TCFD? If it's such a hot topic, what's in it for them? For Sally, what she's seeing on the ground in the UK, especially now it's going to be made mandatory by 2022. Is it going to happen in Singapore, in Malaysia? What does the future portend for us? And specifically, Lin Sim, what's the big next step for TCFD? It's been around for a couple of years, Lin Sim. What does Michael Bloomberg want? So you have the inside track. So we're going to tap you on that. And finally, Christmas comes early. We all need that cheer for all of us, given the pandemic. We need a Christmas gift. What does Christmas comes with TCFD for us? And with that, maybe over to Lin Sim as the caretaker for TCFD. What was the purpose for setting up TCFD?
Okay, well, let me take it from a different angle, like you can read the reasons for TCFD on the TCFD website, but I'd put it this way: if we start from climate change and recognize this as a major secular trend, we'll know that with such a big movement, you're going to have major financial effects. And if it's so important that countries around the world will volunteer to slow the process, we know that there is going to be policy changes as the world transitions. So with all these major effects, you would be concerned about financial stability. And so at the most macro level, the purpose of TCFD recommending disclosures to be made is so that people who use the disclosures can manage the transition in order to have financial stability as we transition to the future. If you think about the financial institutions themselves, you've got banks, insurance companies, and asset owners and asset managers. All of them use information provided by companies. They are exposed to these companies in terms of the funds that they put out. And they need that information. So companies need to provide information on how climate change affects them, affects their strategy, their risk, how they governances matter, and what metrics and targets they use in the process. So these are useful information that they need to know and that they should then tell their stakeholders, like financial institutions, so that they can in turn internalize that into their operations and then pass that information along down that value chain right to the ultimate beneficiary of the pension fund, that depositor of the bank. So it's that value chain. And so on one hand, you can say that if everyone has information, we can piece it all together and have a big picture. But I rather think it's not so easy. I'd rather say that if individuals have the information that they need in order to make informed decisions about their financial assets, then they can take care of themselves, as it were. And on a macro basis, you then have a much more stable financial system than you would have otherwise. So I think that really is the purpose of TCFD. And may I add this, that being a market solution, a recommendation by market practitioners to other market practitioners, then you have a certain more assurance that it is implementable, quickly implementable. It may be tough, the ask may be a big one, but you can go some way towards it rather than having someone, as it were, from on high, imposing a standard where you do not know for sure if it will be relevant to so many sectors. So I think that's why a disclosure and a recommended disclosure, so that it dovetails with regulatory regimes around the world and can be implemented.
Thanks, Nancy. So Nancy, I hear you in terms of the value chain, and if with any chain, it's as good as its weakest link. So all of us need to play a role in that value chain, and if everybody
Yes.
plays their part, everybody will be much better for it.
Yes, for sure, indeed.
Thank you, Lindsay. Sally, maybe we hear from you from a practitioner point of view. What do you think is the purpose of TCFD?
Thank you, Wanchan, and lovely to have so many of you on the phone with us today. Thanks for taking the time. Great to be here. Look, everything that Lim Sim said I absolutely agree with. Some really good points, particularly around the value chain. And I wanted to pick up on two things really from a practitioner perspective. I think the purpose of TCFD, it's a very helpful tool in supporting stakeholder engagement from a corporate perspective. and it gives companies the opportunity to demonstrate to their stakeholders, investors, clients, employees, and others about how they're engaging proactively with the risks and opportunities presented by climate change. And I think that's really important. And I think the other thing in that is it's also an opportunity to demonstrate how companies are really preparing for the future. So how they're managing their longer term viability, which is becoming increasingly important in this idea of resilience over time, and how these things are being embedded into decision-making processes. So I think it's a really good tool, taking on board everything Lim Sing said, but it's a really good tool to help corporates prepare themselves for the future.
Thanks, Sally, for that, for reinforcing what Lim Sing said. And maybe Sally, back to you again. What's in it for companies who want to adopt TCFD? More money, more power, more influence?
All of the above, Wanchan, all of the above. Let's hope. Look, I think there are a couple of key benefits for companies. I'll run through sort of 4 or 5 that I think are really important. I think, just building on what I said before, this idea of developing long-term thinking and resilience, I think is really, really important for companies. And I think, again, it's a useful exercise and very helpful in that process. I think better decision-making is key to all this. Increased awareness and understanding of climate-related risks, opportunities, and the implications of those things really help to inform more strategic planning and better risk management business. So I think eventually it runs to better decisions and better run businesses. I think that's really important. One of the other benefits that we've seen working with companies is strengthened governance arrangements, particularly at the board level, but also permeating throughout the organization, like Joanne was picking up on, from the bottom and also from the top. But it really helps to strengthen internal collaboration and integrated thinking, because due to the nature of climate risks, climate issues spanning risk, finance, sustainability, governance, all those different issues, we're seeing TCFD is being used as a tool for companies to better collaborate and develop an integrated approach, because these things are business issues. So we need to pull on the business together. So I think that's a very helpful internal benefit. The other benefit I would say from the corporate perspective is helping to retain and build stakeholder trust. Every day we're hearing more and more investors want to understand what's happening on this. So I think, again, to reiterate my point from the other question, the framework can help companies to identify the opportunities and to differentiate themselves. And there are opportunities in this transition to a low carbon economy that I don't think should be forgotten. And I think also that leads to the idea of access to capital, because we know more and more decisions are being made on that basis by investors. And I think that's really important to demonstrate how companies are doing it. And then the final thing I would say is that the benefit of this, and I don't think it should just be seen as a climate issue. I think it's a really good opportunity to focus on other sustainability issues and get them onto the boardroom agenda. So I tell our clients to use it as a tool to obviously get climate on the agenda, because that's what is top of mind at the moment, but to use it as a tool to get the broader sustainability issues onto the agenda of the board and understand how these are impacting long-term performance. And I think that's really important moving forward. So those are the 4 or 5 benefits I would say from a corporate perspective that we're seeing, Wansha.
Thanks, Sally. So if I can paraphrase, it's really more a means to an end. Climate TCFD really helps to change the mindset on long-term thinking, and the other things that relates to long-term thinking, like resilience, being able to sustain a business model.
Yes. Wanchan, as we've talked about a lot before, we see reporting, the process of reporting, as the valuable bit of it that drives a lot of thinking internally, helps to align against certain strategies, and then disclosure commits one to doing things. So it's the process, as you said, of going through the process of having to disclose, which I think there's a huge amount of internal benefits for companies.
Thanks, Sally. And over to you, Linsim. I was just looking at the TCFD supporters on your website, on the TCFD website, and I noticed that as of February 2020 this year, we have 1,027 supporters.
Yes.
And only 2 for Malaysia, which is Bursa Malaysia and Securities Commission. So given that the Bank Negara has mandated TCFD reporting, why aren't more companies signing up as supporters, and how does this portend for benefits to companies in a roundabout way?
I think that I can't answer for why companies sign up and don't sign up, but I will say that I think in a way I think companies are being honest. If they sign up, I think they do expect that they will have to make disclosures and that it will take effort, and that then they probably understand that they may not be as confident about just signing up and then we tick the box. I don't think they see this as a tick the box exercise, which is good.
Good point.
So they are thinking before they're actually signing up.
Yep.
Among the companies I've interacted with, some of them I ask, why aren't you signing up as a supporter? And I get this reply, you know us, Linsim, we'll go try it out internally and make sure that we can handle it before we actually commit.
Good
so
point.
I believe that some are doing it and getting that benefit before they're confident enough to say, we will do this on an ongoing basis, because they don't want to start and then stop because it's uncomfortable. And once you've started, you have to be on that disclosure trajectory. The other thing is that some of the asks are not so easy.
Yep.
They are like scenario analysis, like it's area under the curve, whereas stress test is that outlier. So it's your best guess, but there are many pathways. In TCFD, we recommend some of the more well-known and more readily available ones to be used, but even so, it is difficult, and companies do have to form these task force of their own or internal committees to actually get together. So I think that although they may not all be reporting to the same, CEO, or they're reporting all around, but at least they're talking, at least they've made a start. And I think that's the only way to actually move it forward well. So I've also heard from some companies that they bit the bullet, did it, and it needs a certain strong person, sometimes the CFO, if not the CEO, to actually get the movement going, and then it adds on. But of course, as you said, tone from the top is really important, and what the top says and does and demonstrates will of course move it. I think companies could do well to look at it holistically, because it's not just about reporting in order to for their brand and their reputation and for raising funds. And raising funds is not just one green bond, but it's equity, bonds, bank loans, and now you interact with insurers, etc. They're all going to be looking at the longer term effects, because as regulators are moving in this direction, we can see that that's very clear. Even in Singapore, MAS has put out a consultation about guidance. It's a very small step, but still a first step. But anyway, so you can see that in the financing side of things, it's very clear that the only way it's going to move is up, as it were. And then on the business side, as Sally has already said, and the reports show, the analysis shows that it's whether it's integrated into their strategy as not two strategies, but one, that how it's almost, previously there was so much emphasis on up to the minute reporting and quarterly reporting because people were keeping things hidden, etc. So maybe we moved so much in that direction. Now we've got to examine the other side, which is the long term. So in a sense, you actually have to do both. It doesn't mean that you have one at the expense of the other, but you've got to look short term because it's immediate and that's what's going to hit the market and that's what happens the next day. But you also have to look long term because of the implications of the investments and the cash flows and all the planning that takes place. And if you're in any of the industries like the energy, in utilities, in infrastructure, which lasts 30 years and 50 years, you have to. It's part of the business. And so I think people are used to doing scenarios. They're not used to doing scenarios about climate. And so I think the more information gets into that area and the more capabilities are developed, more science gets into it, then I think that we are on a better footing because it will become more common knowledge and then gets embedded into all that investors do and markets do.
Well said, Ensim. So to summarize from both Sally and Ensim, is really TCFD benefit to companies. Is really it helps. It's a catalyst for the mindset change for things which are more important on a holistic basis rather than just climate-related change. And with that, maybe Sally, we can come back to you. What are you seeing on the ground? I mean, Erica presented some stats on the findings of research on TCFD, on sustainability. What are your views? Are we getting traction on the ground in the UK?
Absolutely, Wanchan. Thanks for that. As you said, Erica mentioned some of our key findings from the research already. So overall, we've seen a significant step change in terms of adoption of TCFD, but also quite a few gaps in terms of meaningful disclosures. And I think it's picking up on what Lim Sim said. This is not an easy thing. So although we're getting a lot more commitment from companies, there is a lot of work to be done behind this. So we've seen a lot of progress across a lot of areas, but what I thought might be interesting, really picking up on the evolution that Joanne shared at the beginning in that slide in terms of the sustainability evolution, I thought I would compare what we're seeing around TCFD in that way. And in terms of in the UK and the FTSE 100 that we looked at, we found that there are really four main categories of companies, and they're split about a quarter of the FTSE fall into each of these categories. So I'll start from the very bottom. So we saw beginners, is what we've called them, with about a number of companies, as I said, about 25%, with very limited disclosure against the 11 TCFD recommendations. No specific reference really to climate change at all in their reporting, and specifically no reference to TCFD. Usually these companies are reporting on a couple of the recommendations around scope 1 and scope 2, but that's usually compliance driven rather than strategically driven, okay? So that for those companies, it's not really on the map at all. The next step up is what we're calling low level or intermediate, where we see companies taking small steps on the journey. So we're seeing, again, they're starting to move beyond compliance to operational integration. So addressing some of these things, and they have limited to moderate disclosures against the TCFD recommendations, sort of 4 or 5 out of the 11. They're generally focused on, again, a lot of the scope 1 and scope 2 emissions, limited information on risk and governance, but there are some attempts. And what we're finding is these companies are beginning to commit, because what we're seeing is they're actually mentioning climate change as an issue in their leadership statements. So they are addressing that it is an issue that they need to grapple with. And I think that's an important small step, but a big one in a lot of ways. So it is onto the agenda. The next stage up really from that is where we are seeing companies take much larger steps towards integration. So they're evolving to be more strategic in their approach. So they've started at a very operational level. These companies are doing moderate disclosure against the recommendations, And what we're seeing though is a commitment, usually in the leadership statements, a commitment to actually say, we're reporting on TCFD. So as Lin Sim said, that's a big step, I think, to actually publicly disclose that one is reporting on it. So they're firmly making a commitment towards it, or acknowledging that they need to. We, as Erica showed in our stats, we had a big jump last year from 39 companies out of the 100 to 67 actually acknowledging TCFD and referencing that. So I think that's a good first step. What we're seeing in terms of reporting though is it's still very siloed. Most of it is still in the sustainability section, which gives us the sense that it's not really being seen as a business critical issue yet. We're still thinking about it in a very siloed way as a sustainability strategy and a sustainability approach rather than a business imperative. The next stage up is, I think, those that are moving towards full integration, okay? And we are very encouraged by this lot. Again, this is about a quarter of the FTSE, much more strategically driven. These companies are disclosing much fuller around the recommendations and specifically reporting against the 4 pillars of TCFD: governance, strategy, risk, and metrics and targets, okay? Whereas in a lot of the other groups I've gone through, they may be reporting against a few of those different pillars, but not all of them. What we're also beginning to see as companies integrate this more into their reporting, we're finding that as they get more mature in their approaches and their development, and as Limson said, in terms of scenario analysis and the detail required from that, we're finding them covering a lot of that in the annual report, but also actually beginning to produce separate TCFD reports or supplemental TCFD reports with greater information in them. So not all of that detail is in the annual report, but those things are very closely cross-referenced. And even with these companies, we're seeing them as well be very consistent about the way that they're approaching and begin to communicate on their websites as well. So really taking a big step forward. So those are the 4 stages that we're seeing. And really, I think that's the evolution of the journey. And I think that it isn't easy, and it is a journey. And I think, like Linson said, we need to just encourage companies to get started thinking about these things. I think that's very important.
And as a follow-up question, Sally, thanks for that. Are you able to distinguish those who are in the more integrated reporting stage? Are these companies the ones that generally do well in terms of their performance, market cap, business profitability?
It's a really good question. I mean, we haven't analyzed that in as much detail. Maybe that's another a research piece that we do know. But I think that those that sit in the top category would be those that we recognize and we work with in terms of understanding the importance of these broader sustainability, non-financial issues to long-term performance. I think that is very apparent. So they've embraced this as a strategic issue among other issues. So it's not just climate. They're usually inevitably thinking about the impact of, you know, ESG on the long-term performance of their business. And I think that's I would say the trend that we're seeing there. And also these companies, it's very linked up to their overarching strategy, and they're the ones that tend to see this and position this not just as a risk mitigation exercise, but an opportunity for future development and transition into a new world.
Thanks, Sally. Well said. Lindsay, over to you before we come to our Christmas wish. What's the inside track on TCFD? Have you been speaking to Michael Bloomberg recently?
No, but we've been doing a lot of work via webinar, via web connections, and we have to gather people from, you know, various time zones. So it's not very easy. It's usually around this time or and later. Okay. But I think that, to be fair, I have to tell you, we were extended long beyond what we thought our job was done in 2017. But then they said, no, I think you better stay around to see it through and see whether what you recommended made sense or whether, you know, the market didn't want it at all, and so on. So this year, what we've been working on is some additional help, additional guidance, if you like, for adopting the various recommendations under those 11 asks, the 11 boxes in that single table, and 4 under the 4 governance strategy, integrating into risk management and the metrics and targets. So there will be more on that, on integrating risk, climate change into risk. I think that was felt after some looking into the market that there might be some difficulties to get into the area. So helps producing something helpful from companies and from advisors who work on this. So certain areas like that, like you know, the resilience in the long term. So on the um, on the scenario, so there will be something on scenarios, and these the areas which are important, and that will come out very soon, in a few months' time. So it'll help companies to implement, and that's the idea. We still feel that the original purpose is relevant, that the recommendations are relevant. In fact, somehow people use it as like a framework to talk about risks and talk about you know, opportunities, which is nice. And so in that case, we should help it along. And so people were willing to actually get together and do the work. And if I might be permitted a little joke, I mean, where else, you know, you have to appreciate this, because where else do you get competitors to get together and produce a single document, a recommendation? It must be so important that they'll think the differences, get together and do it. So if I were you, watch out for it and make use of it. Really, it is the best efforts, and trying to advance understanding and make it easier for people to get into the area. And so maybe when you next do your survey, you know, the numbers will be really high, and that will be nice. It will be nice for all of us. That's what we're looking at. I think the other thing is that various groups have taken up the TCFD recommendations and worked on it, like TPI, you know, the Transition Pathway Initiative, where they took it further. And so that helps to bring it into practice, as it were. Then there's PRI, which has required their sign-ups, their members to do TCFD reporting, which is coming up, I believe, very soon. And so I think there will be something there. And so I think all these other efforts, there's even a new one I heard, Net Zero Asset Owners Association. Well, that's got Z's in it. But, you know, add to your alphabet soup, Wanchen. But it does mean that people are serious, and that other groups are producing helpful material and extending the capability. And that on the other side, the asset owner's side, there's action looking at how to make use of and to encourage more of these, you know, decision useful disclosures, as we say. So I think it is moving, and we just need to encourage it in our part of the world as well. I think the Japanese companies have had big number have signed up as supporters of TCFD, so one should see more coming out there.
Very heartwarming, then, Sim. I feel like breaking out in "We Are the World" song soon.
just do it like Nike.
With that, we just crossed 8 p.m. Sally, over to you. The Christmas wish for TCFD, or Christmas wish in general. What's your wish for us this evening before we sign off?
Okay, look, my wish is I would like people to see this, particularly corporates, as an opportunity to better prepare themselves for the long term. I think it's really important that we focus on it as an opportunity. I think it's an opportunity to get these issues onto the boardroom agenda yeah, not just climate, but other sustainability issues. I think it's an opportunity to galvanize people internally around a common cause and understanding and greater alignment across the organization. I also think we have to ensure that we don't let perfect be the enemy of the good. I think it's really important to just get started, as Lindsay was saying. Few organizations have everything that they need in the first year, but get started on the issues that you can tackle and develop a longer term plan to tackle those things. And I think just education and collaboration are my two final points. As Limson was saying, I welcome the guidance. There's lots of great guidance out there. There's lots of organizations like the Chapter Zero initiative, which is focused on NEDs, which I know is coming out of WEF. I know they've got chapters around the world, which provides tools and questions boards should be considering around these issues. There's Accounting for Sustainability that has a CFO network that's very focused on helping integration. And so I think that idea of collaborating and learning from others, not just internally, but externally, about what others are doing. People are very open to sharing their experiences. And I think one should, take advantage of that and reach out and get involved in some of these networks or reach out and talk to other people. So use it as an opportunity is my Christmas wish rather than an obligation.
Well said, Sally. Santa Claus will be happy with you. And Lindsay, what's your Christmas wish for us this evening?
Well, why don't I end this? At the beginning, I said that climate change was a major secular trend. And you remember, I don't know if you remember in the bond markets, we used to say the trend is your friend. You can't disregard it because it'll be there, it'll happen. And if you actually pay attention, find out more, and make sure, see what is relevant and work on it, then I think there will be gain there. And so I think that would be in line with what TCFD would like.
The trend is your friend.
And it's the climate change and sustainability trend.
Okay. Yes. And just on that, I think Mark Carney's quote was, we can't self-isolate from climate change. And I think that rings very true to what you're saying. So we better deal with it.
Okay. Joanne and Erica, your Christmas wish?
I don't know. Nothing too different. But I was going to use that Mark Carney quote, Sally, but you took it from me first. It's the same, that we should probably see this as a bigger issue beyond just climate and keeping it siloed, and yeah, take it as an opportunity, really. Hopefully that TCFD framework is seen as a framework, a generalized framework to look at other sustainability topics. That would be it.
Thanks, Erica. And Joanne, you wrap up for us. What's your Christmas wish?
I think the ladies have said it all so well. Take it as an opportunity, not an obligation. And bring it to the very top levels of the organization, your board, the CEO. Be the champions for climate issues in your own organization.
Thanks, Joanne. And with that, thank you everybody for taking part in this webinar, the last webinar of the 8th series. I'd like to thank Sally, Len Sim, Joanne, and Erica for spending their time this evening with us, and all the participants. Once again, this is the last of our 8-part series of trust webinars that we've been holding together in conjunction with the Working Capital co-working space provider that we've been working with them since April of this year. All the recordings will be available via the link that we just shared with you earlier today. But we'll be sending you a follow-up email to let you know once all 8 are loaded. The first 7 are already loaded on the Black Sun website. And with that, on behalf of the panelists and speakers, thank you everybody and have a good evening.
Thank you, Wanchun.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
everyone.
Bye.
you,
Thank
everyone.
you. Thank you, everybody.